Dog's name was Ranger, and he was bleeding out on the floor of the emergency bay when Nora Callahan first saw him. She had been on hour 11 of a 12-hour shift, charting vitals at the nurse's station, when the automatic doors slid open and three men in desert-pattern fatigues rushed in carrying what she initially thought was a soldier. It took her a second, maybe two, to register that the shape they were lowering onto the linoleum was a German shepherd and that the dark spreading stain soaking through the tactical vest strapped to his body was not oil. Nora was already moving before she made the conscious decision to move. "Ma'am, you need to step back." The tallest of the three soldiers put a hand up. His name tape read Callaway. His jaw was set, and his eyes were red around the edges. "We just need someone to tell us where the nearest animal hospital is. Our GPS is—" "That dog is in shock," Nora said, and she went to her knees beside Ranger without waiting for permission. She pressed two fingers to the inside of his back thigh, feeling for a femoral pulse. It was there, but thin, thready, the kind of pulse that had maybe minutes behind it. "How long ago?" 40 minutes, said the shorter soldier behind Callaway. His voice cracked on the second syllable. 40 minutes. She did the math quickly and didn't love the answer. "The nearest emergency vet is 22 minutes from here," the third soldier said. He was holding a phone, the screen lit with a map. "We didn't think, we just saw the hospital sign and we—" "Bring him into Bay 3, Nora said. The silence that followed lasted exactly 1 second. Then Callaway said carefully, "Ma'am, we can't bring a dog into an emergency room. Bay 3 is at the end of the hall. The curtain is blue. Go left off the elevator." She was already rising, already turning toward the supply cabinet on the far wall, already running through the checklist in her head. Saline, pressure bandages, shears. If the vessel was still intact, she had a window. If it wasn't, the window was closing fast. "I'll meet you there in 30 seconds. She heard them hesitate. She heard footsteps. She chose to believe they were moving in the right direction and grabbed what she needed. She was in Bay 3 in 28 seconds. Nora had been a registered nurse for 6 years, the last 4 of them at Benedict Regional Medical Center in Harlow, Georgia. She had grown up 2 towns over, in a house with a rusted mailbox and a father who spent 22 years in the Army before a roadside device in Kandahar took the use of his left hand. Her father had 2 things. He repeated so often they had become a kind of household liturgy. Never leave your people behind. And a working dog is not a pet. It is a soldier. She had internalized both statements so deeply that when she saw Ranger, some part of her brain simply did not process him as outside her jurisdiction. She worked fast. The wound was on his left hind quarter, a through and through that had nicked the lateral circumflex femoral artery without fully severing it. She applied pressure, pushed fluids, called down to the pharmacy using the wall phone, keeping her voice calm and level because the soldiers were watching her with an intensity she recognized. She had seen it in her father's friends when they talked about things that still kept them up. The expression "that meant this matters more than I can explain to someone who wasn't there." The dog's name was Ranger, she learned. Military working dog, 7 years old, handled by Sergeant Danny Farrow, who was the shorter soldier, the one whose voice had cracked. Ranger had been stateside for a training exercise when a routine demonstration had gone sideways. The details were vague, and Nora did not push. She knew how to hold information loosely when it wasn't hers to hold. She worked for 40 minutes. Ranger's pulse steadied. His breathing slowed from panicked and shallow to something more even. He didn't try to bite her, which she took as either a sign of severe exhaustion or an animal's instinct about who was trying to help. She preferred to believe the latter. She was rechecking the pressure dressing when the curtain to Bay 3 opened. She knew, without looking up, who it was. She had worked under Sandra Pruitt for 4 years and had developed what she privately called a Pruitt proximity sense, a particular tension in her shoulders that activated whenever her supervisor entered a room. Callahan. Pruitt's voice was the kind of quiet that was louder than shouting. "What is happening in this bay?" It was not a question. Nora finished smoothing the edge of the bandage before she looked up. "Treating a patient with arterial damage to the left hind quarter. Vitals are stabilizing." "That is a dog. That is a military working dog who would have bled out in the parking lot if we hadn't intervened." I've used 2 units of saline, 1 pressure kit, and about 40 minutes. No equipment was redirected from human patients. Bay 3 was empty. She stood up, stripped her gloves. He's going to need a vet for follow-up, but he's stable enough to transport now. These soldiers need a referral to the nearest emergency animal clinic and a phone number. Pruitt's eyes moved from Nora to the soldiers to Ranger and back to Nora. Her expression did not soften once during the circuit. You brought an animal into a sterile medical bay. I brought an injured military working dog into an unused bay to prevent his death. Yes. That is a violation of approximately 6 facility policies, Callahan. This room will need to be fully sanitized. We have liability. With respect, said Sergeant Farrow from the corner of the bay, he would have died. Pruitt did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Nora. That, Nora would think later, said everything there was to say about Sandra Pruitt. A soldier standing 3 feet away, voice rough, telling her what was at stake, and she didn't look at him once. You have patients on the floor, Pruitt said. I checked. Mrs. Alderman in Bay 1 has been seen. The 2 in Bay 5 are waiting on imaging results. I was not abandoning anyone. Step out into the hall. Nora looked at Ranger. His chest was rising and falling steadily. Calloway had moved to crouch beside him, one large hand resting very gently on the dog's shoulder. Farah was looking at the floor. She stepped out into the hall. The conversation with Pruitt lasted 11 minutes. Nora knew because she watched the clock on the wall behind Pruitt's left ear. Partly to keep herself grounded, partly because she had learned a long time ago that when someone was speaking to you in that particular administrative tone, measured, file-building, consequence-laden, you counted, you documented, you remembered. Pruitt outlined the policy violations in order, her voice never rising, her hands clasped in front of her. Unsanctioned use of facility supplies, use of a medical bay for non-human patients, potential breach of health code, potential liability exposure, conduct unbecoming of a staff representative of Benedict Reginald. That was the phrase she used, conduct unbecoming. Nora stood with her hands at her sides and did not interrupt. When Pruitt finished, she said, "Given the nature of this incident and the visibility it may generate, I am placing you on immediate administrative suspension pending a full review. You'll need to surrender your badge to HR before you leave the building." Nora heard the words. She processed them. She felt something move through her that was not quite anger and not quite grief. Something more like the particular exhaustion of realizing that the world is, in fact, exactly as disappointing as your most tired moments had suggested. "His name is Ranger," she said. "He has a service record. He's 7 years old, and he has a handler who's been with him for 4 years. She paused. "I would do the same thing tomorrow." "I know you would," Pruitt said. "That's why this is necessary." HR was a man named Glenn, who was embarrassed and couldn't look at her directly. He took her badge and gave her a form and said something about the process and how she should receive written communication within 5 business days. She shook his hand because she had been raised to be civil, even when civility felt like swallowing glass. Then she collected her coat and her bag from her locker, and she walked out through the ambulance bay because she did not want to walk back through the emergency room where the whole floor could watch her leave. It was 7:14 in the evening. The air outside was warm and smelled like cut grass from the park across the street. She sat down on the curb beside her car and put her face in her hands, not crying exactly, just breathing. Just holding still for a moment before she had to figure out what came next. She sat there for about 4 minutes before she heard boots on the pavement behind her. It was Calloway. He stood a few feet away with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the parking lot like he was giving her the option of pretending she didn't see him. "You got suspended," he said. "I did. Because of Ranger. Because of the policy violations associated with treating Ranger technically. There's a distinction, apparently." She looked up at him. "How is he?" Calloway sat down on the curb beside her, which she hadn't expected. He was a big man, and it took him a moment to fold himself down. "He's okay. Vet clinic is keeping him overnight. Farrow's with him." He was quiet for a moment. He wasn't going to make it. "You know that. 22 more minutes, and he wouldn't have made it." "I know." Ranger's been on 3 deployments. He found an IED cache in Helmand province that saved 11 lives. Faro sleeps maybe 4 hours a night, and the other 4 he spends with that dog. Calloway looked at the ground. I just want you to know that what you did tonight, it matters. It matters a lot to us. Nora nodded. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed. Thank you for telling me that. I'm sorry about your job. Don't be. I'd do it again. She meant it completely. Calloway stood up, and then he paused. He looked at her for a long moment with an expression she couldn't quite read. What's the name of your supervisor? The woman who? Pruitt. Sandra Pruitt. She hesitated. Why? He didn't answer. He just nodded once, like he was filing something away. Then he walked back toward the hospital entrance. Nora watched him go. She had no idea, sitting on that curb in the Georgia twilight, what the next 72 hours would look like. She could not have predicted it. Looking back later, she would say that she didn't think much at all in that moment. She just sat with the quiet and the smell of the grass and the knowledge that she had done the right thing. And she let that be enough. For now, it had to be. The next morning, she called her father. He picked up on the second ring, the way he always did, like he had been expecting her. She had barely gotten through the summary when he went quiet with a particular quality of quiet that she recognized as the sound of a man who was holding back a strong opinion until he had all the facts. They suspended you, he said when she finished. Pending review. For treating a military working dog who would have died. For the associated policy violations. He was quiet again. Then your mother would have done the same thing. Her mother had been a veterinary technician for 30 years. Nora had grown up in a house where wounded strays were treated on the kitchen table, and no animal in need was ever turned away from the door. She blinked against the sudden pressure behind her eyes. I know, Dad. You did the right thing, Nori. I know. What are you going to do now? She looked around her apartment, the coffee maker, the half-read novel on the counter, the succulents she kept forgetting to water, the normal architecture of her life. I don't know yet. Wait and see, I guess. HR said 5 business days. Okay. A pause. I'm going to make some calls. Dad, you don't have to. I'm not doing it because I have to. I'm doing it because I want to. His voice was steady and final in the way it got when there was no point in arguing. Let me know if anything changes. She didn't ask who he was planning to call. Her father had spent 22 years building a particular kind of network, the kind made of shared deployments and shared losses, and a mutual understanding that ran deeper than words. She trusted that he knew what he was doing, the way she had always trusted it, even when she didn't fully understand it. She spent the day doing ordinary things. She did laundry. She took a long walk. She sat in the park across from the hospital, which she recognized afterward as probably not the healthiest choice, and watched people come and go through the main entrance for a while before she made herself stand up and go home. That evening, she got a text from a number she didn't recognize. This is Farrell. Ranger is stable. Eating this morning. Vet says he can travel in 4 to 5 days. He wouldn't be here without you. Thank you. She stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed back, I'm really glad he's okay. Take care of him. She put the phone face down on the counter and stood very still in her kitchen for a moment, feeling something she couldn't quite name. Not happiness, exactly. Not satisfaction. Something quieter and more durable. The sense of having been exactly who she needed to be at exactly the right moment, regardless of the cost. Then she went to bed. 71 hours after Sandra Pruitt placed Nora Callahan on administrative suspension, a black SUV pulled into the parking lot of Benedict Regional Medical Center. Then another. Then a third. Nora was not there to see them arrive. She learned about it afterward, in pieces, from 3 different people who had been present, and described it the way people describe things that rearrange their understanding of what is possible. What she was told, the vehicles were government-plated. The men who stepped out were not in uniform, or rather, 2 of them were in civilian clothes and 1 was in a service dress uniform, with enough hardware on the chest to stop a conversation from 20 feet. People in the parking lot stopped walking and stood still, the way people do when something is happening that they don't understand but can feel the weight of. They went directly to the administrative wing, did not stop at reception, did not wait. Sandra Pruitt was in her office conducting a staff meeting when the door opened. She told it later as complaints to the board, as a story to colleagues, as a formal grievance. She had many tellings of the next few minutes, and the details shifted depending on who was listening, but the core of it was consistent. 3 men walked into her meeting, one in uniform, and the one in uniform set a folder on her conference table and told her that Ranger's service record was enclosed if she wanted to review it, along with a formal letter of commendation for the nurse who had saved his life, and a request. A request, he was careful to say, not a demand, that the suspension be reviewed and rescinded before end of business that day. The man in the suit, who had said nothing until this point, then mentioned, conversationally, that he worked out of a particular office in Washington, and that he was personally interested in how institutions treated the people who made difficult calls in service of others. He said this in a tone that was mild and even, the way someone speaks when they don't need to raise their voice to make a point. Pruitt asked who had authorized this visit. The man in the suit said that he wasn't at liberty to say, but that if she'd like a list of the individuals who had been notified about the situation over the past 72 hours, he could provide that as well. She did not ask for the list. The staff meeting ended. The 3 men left. By noon, HR had called Nora's cell phone. Glenn, still embarrassed, still not meeting her eyes through the phone, somehow she could tell even over audio, told her that following a review, her suspension had been lifted, her record would reflect no disciplinary action, and she could return to her regular schedule effective the following Monday. She said thank you. She hung up. She sat down slowly on her couch. Then she called her father. He picked up on the second ring. I heard, he said, before she could speak. Who did you call, Dad? A pause. The sound of him settling back in his chair. Just some people who care about doing things right. She laughed despite herself. That's not an answer. It's the one I've got. A beat. How do you feel? She thought about it. About the 11 minutes in the hallway with Pruitt, about sitting on the curb, about the weight of her badge in her hand when she gave it to Glenn, about Pharaoh's text, about the particular silence of her apartment in the hours when she'd been suspended and hadn't known what came next. I feel okay, she said. I actually feel okay. Good. His voice was warm and certain. That's what doing the right thing feels like, eventually. Takes a minute sometimes, but it gets there. She went back on Monday. She walked into the main entrance that time, not the ambulance bay. She nodded to the receptionist and took the elevator up and clocked in and pulled up the floor census and got to work. It was a regular shift. Busy in the early hours, a lull around 2 in the afternoon, 2 simultaneous admissions just before she was due to clock out. Ordinary. Exactly as it should be. She did not see Pruitt that day. She heard through the particular information network that exists in every hospital, the one that runs faster than any official communication, that Pruitt had taken personal leave starting the previous Thursday. No one said why. No one needed to. 3 weeks later, Nora received a package at home. Inside was a photograph in a simple black frame. Ranger, standing, vest on, fully recovered, with Sergeant Farrow crouched beside him and both of them looking directly at the camera. On the back, in handwriting that pressed hard into the paper, he wouldn't be here. We won't forget. Farrow and Ranger. She set it on the windowsill in her living room. Next to the succulents, she had finally remembered to water. Some decisions are made in a split second, in a corridor, in the middle of an ordinary shift, when the right thing and the easy thing are standing in a fork and you choose without the luxury of thinking it through. Some decisions cost you something real before they give anything back. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the cost turns out to be the part that mattered most, the part that proved the decision was real. Nora Callahan knew all of this the way she knew her own heartbeat. She had known it since she was a girl in a house with a rusted mailbox and a father who said the same 2 things over and over until she didn't just know them, she was made of them. The photograph sat in the window. The light came through it every morning. That was enough. I keep coming back to the moment Nora handed over her badge. Not the confrontation in the hallway, not the SUVs in the parking lot, not even the photograph that ended up on her windowsill. I keep coming back to that one quiet moment, badge in hand, Glenn not quite meeting her eyes. Because that's the moment everything could have gone differently inside her. That's the moment a lot of people break in a direction they don't come back from. They get bitter. They start doing the math on whether doing right is ever actually worth it. And honestly, who could blame them? But Nora didn't break that way. And I think about why. There's something I've come to believe about the kind of character Nora had. The kind that holds steady when the cost gets real. It doesn't come from nowhere. It gets built, slowly, out of the values you were handed and the ones you chose to keep. Her father gave her two things she carried like tools: never leave your people behind, and a working dog is a soldier. She didn't just memorize those. She let them shape how she saw the world, so that when Ranger came through those doors bleeding, her brain didn't ask, should I? It just moved. That's what integrity actually looks like when it's real. It's not a decision you deliberate over in the moment. It's already been made, long before the moment arrives. That's the moral part. But there's something else I think people miss when they tell this kind of story. Nora was also smart about it. She didn't act recklessly. She checked which bays were empty. She confirmed no other patients were being neglected. She used the minimum resources. She knew the difference between breaking a rule that mattered and breaking one that was, in this specific situation, hollow. Intelligence in hard moments isn't just book knowledge. It's the ability to read a situation clearly when emotion is running high and still act with precision. She did that, and it's part of why she could stand in that hallway with Pruitt and answer every charge calmly. She hadn't been careless. She had been careful and compassionate at the same time, under pressure. That combination is rarer than people think. And then there's the part about endurance. The 71 hours between the suspension and the phone call from HR. The walk she took past the hospital she wasn't allowed into. The ordinary Tuesday of laundry and waiting. That stretch of time when you've done the right thing and the world hasn't responded yet. That's the part that tests you most. It would have been so easy to spiral. To start second-guessing. To decide that next time she'd just look the other way and keep her badge. She didn't. She sat on the curb, and she breathed, and she let it be enough that she knew what she had done and why. What happened to Pruitt wasn't punishment delivered from above. It was the natural consequence of treating human decency like a liability. What happened to Nora wasn't luck. It was the return on a lifetime of being someone worth standing up for. I think about Ranger's photograph on that windowsill. The light coming through it every morning. Some things cost you something real before they give anything back. That's not a flaw in the system. That's just how you find out what you're actually made of.